the theme of our conference, I believe, is a very significant one. Every so often, I think that we should talk about this subject, because oftentimes we can be so busy about what we are doing that we may begin to lose track of the important and original directions of the TS. So in looking at the why of the Theosophical Society, we need to look back into what was the intention of the founders of the Theosophical Society when they conceived of the Theosophical Society. The society was externally founded in 1875, but it was conceived decades, maybe a century before. I believe that even before Madame Blavatsky was born, it was already conceived, because the work was offered to her formally when she was 20 years old in London. But even before that, she was already under the protection of the teachers even while she was young. And hence, the real founders of the Theosophical Society are the teachers of Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott, and these are the Mahatmas. And hence, in trying to look into the why of the Theosophical Society, I believe that we must look into their thoughts. And very fortunately, we have their thoughts written by them in their letters. It's one of the rare occasions in history that a major movement in history, we have the thoughts of the founders on why they put up such a movement. And these are found in the Mahatma letters. And therefore, I think very important that in every section, we must devote time repeatedly to the study of the Mahatma letters, because this will help us remember why we are in this movement, why we are in the Theosophical Society. In the talks today and yesterday, particularly in this talk, you have given some of the basis on why the society was founded. And there is one facet in the Mahatma letters which I'd like to share with you regarding an important part of the work intended when they founded the Theosophical Society. And I'd like to review these facets by getting excerpts from the Mahatma letters on this point. Here is one from the Letters of the Masters of the Wisdom, Volume 1. There are 3 books on the Mahatma letters. One is the Mahatma letters to APC Net, and the other 2 are the Letters of the Masters of the Wisdom, published by the TS and edited by C. Rajalasa. And this one comes from the Volume 1 of the Letters of the Masters of the Wisdom. And the Mahatma K.H. said, the first object of the TS is philanthropy. The true theosophist is a philanthropist not for himself, but for the world he lives. Take note of their emphasis on for the world, not disciples, not members of the Theosophical Society, but for the world. This and philosophy, the right comprehension of life and its mysteries, will give the necessary basis and show the right path to pursue. He says again, our society is not a mere intellectual school for occultism, and those greater than we, referring to their teachers, the teachers of teachers, those greater than we have said that he who thinks the task of working for others too hard had better not undertake it. The moral and spiritual sufferings of the world are more important and need help and cure more than science needs aid from us in any field of discovery. And he ends with a curious phrase, he that hath ears to hear, let him hear. So the underlined word, I underlined these words, the moral and spiritual sufferings of the world are more important and need their help. Among the letters of the Mahatmas, there is one that is considered the most important, and sometimes it's considered as a charter of the Theosophical Society. It is the Mahachohan's letter. It is found in the Letters of the Masters of the Wisdom, Volume 1, as well as in the second appendix of the Mahatma letters to A.P. Sinet. And it is really worthwhile to go through that letter carefully. The Mahachohan said that we, the devoted followers of that spirit incarnate of absolute self-sacrifice, of philanthropy, divine kindness, should ever allow the TS to represent the embodiment of selfishness, the refuge of the few, but no thought in them for the many. But no thought in them for the many is a strange idea, my brothers. If the Theosophists say we have nothing to do with all this, the lower classes, the inferior races, cannot concern us and must manage as they can, then what becomes of our fine professions of benevolence, philanthropy, reform, etc.? Are these professions a mockery? And if a mockery, can ours be the true path? In other words, if we don't engage in real philanthropy, in real benevolence to the larger whole, is our path a true path? Are we doing the right thing? And finally he says, for our doctrines to practically react on the so-called moral code, or the ideas of truthfulness, purity, self-denial, charity, etc., we have to popularize a knowledge of Theosophy. Popularize. Bring it to the world and not just to our membership. It is not the individual and determined purpose of attaining oneself nirvana, the culmination of all knowledge and absolute wisdom, which is after all only an exalted and glorious selfishness, but the self-sacrificing pursuit of the best means to lead on the right path our neighbors, to cause as many of our fellow creatures as we possibly can to benefit by it, which constitutes the true Theosophists. Again, the Mahachohan emphasizes the word for the public, for the larger population, for the world in general. And he says, shall we not devote, at the time, there was a request particularly from A.O. Hume, that because of his superior intelligence, it would be very worthwhile for the Mahatmas to teach them the secrets of occultism, for them to demonstrate perhaps to the world what the teachings of the masters are, and wanted to have a kind of exclusive school of occultism for a few. And the Mahatma K.H. as well as the Mahachohan objected very vehemently to this. He says, shall we not devote ourselves to teaching a few Europeans and leave the teeming millions of the ignorant, of the poor and despised, the lowly and the oppressed, to take care of themselves and of their hereafter as best they know how? Never. Rather perish the TS with both its hapless founders than that we should permit it to become no better than an academy of magic, a hall of occultism. This was also mentioned by Linda yesterday. So, if we symbolize these original teachings, the impulse from the Mahatmas, by the circle with the star inside, and then this is brought to the TS and the Theosophical Society, and known as Theosophy to the world, to us, which is composed of, 20,000+ members. this is not the intention of the Mahatmas in establishing the society. The intention is to bring this to the teeming millions, in his words, to bring this wisdom, the application of this wisdom to the teeming millions. Now, these truths and insights have been brought to the world through the Theosophical Society, and it has been studied, written about. So many books have been published about it for the past 140 years. And so we have, in the past century, a very solid set of literature that made these teachings very clear, particularly to the Theosophists. But these ideas alone will not be sufficient, that they will be known to the world, because we now have to convert them into applications that will make them relevant to the social and human problems of the world. This is applied theosophy, applied philosophy. Ideas are said to be powerful, but in truth they are not powerful unless they are translated into practices that can transform individuals or transform society. Now, it is in this area, I believe, that we are faltering. There had been a very strong impulse in this direction in the early years of the Theosophical Society, but after half a century, this effort faltered. It can be seen in many ways. Let's take a look at our membership. As Pedro mentioned earlier, the peak membership of the Theosophical Society was in 1928, when we had 45,000 members. But today, 2016, when the world population has grown by 3.5 times to 7 billion, it was 2 billion at the time, our membership has dropped down to about 26,000. So instead of growing proportionately with the population, we have shrunk. And hence, in terms of the number of workers of the Theosophical Society, it has become less in addressing the problems of the world through the Theosophical Society, and hence we become less effective in this area. A very prominent leader of the Theosophical Society once told me many years ago, one time she was entertaining a visitor in the national headquarters. There was a section about the Theosophical Society, and she was showing the things on the board about what the Theosophical Society is, the meetings and so on. And then after some explanation, this visitor asked, she said, "But what is it that you do?" And then she repeated that we have lodges, we study this, we study those, and so on. And after this explanation, again the visitor asked, "But what is it really that you do?" And then she realized that this visitor was asking a different kind of question. What is the relevance of the Theosophical Society to the world in general? What is it doing other than studying things? And then she realized that he had some difficulty answering this question. In the early years of the Theosophical Society, particularly in the era of Anipesan, this aspect of applied theosophy was very strong, very powerful. In fact, in going through the history of the early years of the Theosophical Society, I was amazed at how many orders, how many leagues, how many organizations were formed throughout the world to do so many things, including something like League for Letter Writing, and then League against Alcoholism, and so on. So many applied aspects formed by many members, and somehow almost none of them are existing today. And it is in this area, I think, that we should look into again and then try to revive it. Now, This applied aspect is also emphasized by the letters of the Mahatmas. And I'd like to pick up some excerpts from this. In the letters of the Masters of the Wisdom, there is a letter there. It is not indicated who this master is, but this is what he said. Theosophy must not represent merely a collection of moral verities, a bundle of metaphysical ethics epitomized in theoretical dissertations. Theosophy must be made practical and has therefore to be disencumbered of useless discussion. It has to find objective expression in an all-embracing code of life thoroughly impregnated by its spirit. Thoroughly impregnated by its spirit. It has to find objective expression, implementation of the ideas in the affairs of the world, but such an expression must be thoroughly impregnated by its spirit. The same letter said, its followers have to set the example of a firmly outlined and as firmly applied morality before they get the right to point out, even in a spirit of kindness, absence of alike ethic, unity, and singleness of purpose in other associations and individuals. Take note of the phrase used here. We have to set the example of a firmly outlined and as firmly applied morality. We have to set the example. We have to do it ourselves. We cannot wait for other people to pick up our ideas in order to apply them to the problems of the world. We must demonstrate it first. And in the Mahachohan's letter, he says a very powerful statement. To be true, religion and philosophy must offer the solution of every problem. Of every problem. And if our doctrines will show their competence to offer it, then the world will be the first one to confess that that must be the true philosophy, the true religion, the true light, which give truth and nothing but the truth. Now, before I go into what perhaps we can go into, I just would like to take an example from outside of the Theosophical Society on how these are being done in some of the major movements in the world. I happen to have visited certain countries, been invited by organizations in the Buddhist world, and I was amazed at many of the things that they do in the applied area. For example, in the Buddhist order of Thich Nhat Hanh, whom many of you know, and they have branches all over the world, and one of the major centers is in Hong Kong. And I found that they have what they call an Institute of Applied Buddhism. Applied Buddhism. In other words, it is an attempt to look at the principles of Buddhism and apply it into the various areas and problems of human life. And as we see in the world today, Buddhism has very many interesting, effective, applied work throughout the world in a wide variety of areas. And it's such an amazing model for us to look into. Zen is an example. Zen is supposed to be the practice towards enlightenment of a few people. And yet, the effect of a Zen life, of Zen meditation, has proven to be very helpful to everybody, even to those who are not looking for enlightenment. In Japan, corporations send their executives to Zen meditation classes because they've become more effective as executives. And throughout the world, there are many such centers in which people who are not after enlightenment go through Zen meditation in order to improve their own lives. In one time, I was invited to go to Taiwan to visit a major Buddhist group in Taiwan, and I was surprised at what they were doing. They had a daily newspaper in their area. They have several universities. They have one or two television channels in the city, then radio programs. and so many other things that it's actually like a whole community, a way of life that's not just limited to what we call religion. It's more about how do we solve the issues in life through the tenets of that religion. And in fact, their brand of Buddhism has been called by its founder as humanistic Buddhism. Humanistic meaning human-centered rather than otherworldly centered or theocentric. It's more on how to solve the problems of human beings and society. So let me just at random think of directions that perhaps we ourselves can do in the Theosophical Society. There's something which the ideas on this is almost limitless, and we can be very creative in looking at applications, but at the same time, we can also look at the examples of other movements, existing movements, who have been very successful in this area for the past more than 1,000 years. So one thing that sections can do more easily would be to think of applied practical courses. And this can be done in three modes. The first one is to have a center, a physical center where people can go over there. The second would be to offer such courses outside the Theosophical Society, where it's being offered seminars for corporations, for universities, for the public, for government, and so on. And then the third would be online courses. This is a new innovation that we find becoming more and more popular, as in webinars and Skype meetings and so on. What are examples? There are so many examples, and I think right now the section leading in this area would be the American section, and there's so much for us to learn from them about what can be done. So, for example, it can be a course, an ongoing course on self-transformation in many of its facets. In the Philippines, we have used this as a kind as a core course that's being offered to many groups, not just to members of the Theosophical Society. In fact, more than 90% of those who attend the seminar are non-members. It has been offered to universities and colleges. It has been offered to corporations for team buildings and for work harmony in corporations. It has been used for government. Mayors have asked us to conduct the seminar for their administrative staff in their cities, and the mayors themselves would attend. Then it has been used for the military, for peace education, and so on. And with a very small membership of the Theosophical Society, it can reach out because people find that we do offer a solution to many of the quandaries that they face in their organizations and in their lives. Then meditation courses. We do teach meditation, but there's a difference between how we do it and the way that, for example, the Buddhists do it. Among the Buddhists, they have a center just on meditation alone. What we do is to teach it one time and then maybe do it another time, rather than a continuing practice. In Manila, there are several Buddhist centers in which week after week, you just go there, whether you're Buddhist or not, you go there and practice meditation. And I've known of many Christians who consider themselves as Christian, but who go there in these Buddhist temples and workshops week after week in order to deepen their own meditation practice. Then things like stress reduction, because stress is one of the serious maladies of modern life. Then other things like couples, marital harmony, issues about marriage, sustaining marriage, deepening marriage, then parenting, then life planning, then vegetarianism, and so on. The list is very, very long. And as we identify a human problem, then we can think of ways in addressing that problem on the root level making use of theosophical principles. Youth centers. Each succeeding generation, the world in each succeeding generation will depend upon how young people are molded today. And there is unfortunately so much inadequacy in the school system in many countries in the world that while academically things seem to be improving, but morally in terms of character development and personality development, there seems to be a lack of it, or there is not much improvement. So there is a lot of violence, there is a lot of social drug problems in the world involving young people, and we must be involved in this. One of the ways is by, and there are many approaches. For example, if a section offers scholarship to young people in your own country, those scholars will become a group of young people whom you can meet and nurture for many, many years. If you have, let's say, 50 scholars, then you meet them several times a year, have activities with them, then they will be imbued with the values and the way of life, the worldview of the Theosophy or the Theosophical Society, and it can change their lives forever. Youth centers is one way that many other organizations are going into, because you have a physical center where you have books, you have chessboards, you have activities, and any young person can just go in and then make use of the facilities of the center and be involved with other young people in various activities. Young people are always looking for events and happenings. They need to belong somehow. And if there are no better alternatives, then they go to their groups, their peers, which may lead them in unhelpful ways. And hence, the existence of youth centers where young people can go to, and if they're happy and they feel that it's something very helpful and productive, they will invite other young people to come in there. Another one would be public libraries and computer centers. Now, in the third world, there are many people who don't have computers in their homes. And if you set up a public library and then computers are available for research, they will go there. It will become like a magnet for them, because they have to do assignments and do research in the internet, but they don't have a computer at home. And if it's available for free, then they just register, you get to know them, and invite them for talks, activities, and so on. Then that center will become like a magnet that will draw young people there, and then be exposed to another approach to living while they're young. Our work with young people, I think, is very important, and it is not a very encouraging thing whenever I travel around the world and see that the majority of the members are middle-aged above. We should have more of young people. We should be active there. And there is one important reason for this. I'll touch a bit more on this subject when I go into education. But going into work with young people, I think, is one of the most important things that we have to look into in the applied aspect. Another one would be centers of wellness and well-being. And I mentioned in some discussions that when I was in Wheaton a few years ago, I met Fernando Torrijos, yes. And he had worked for many years with Kabat-Zinn, Dr. Kabat-Zinn, who is one of the topmost experts in applying mindfulness on stress management. And he has since retired, and we have asked him, why don't you set up a stress management or wellness center in the American section and get out of retirement and do this? And he was willing to do so. I don't know whether this has been done, but we do have the methodology, the knowledge, the basic approach to living that will enable us to be less stressed in life And hence, this is something that the Theosophical Society can offer throughout the world. This has, however, to be somehow systematized. It cannot just be open with no system. And so one center can be set up and let that become a model for other centers to emulate. The modeling process, I think, is important because some sections are good in one thing and we are not. After they have done it successfully, let us learn from them and let it be replicated elsewhere in the world. Schools. Schools are more difficult to establish, but I think this is one major work that we should look into. And in the early years of the Theosophical Society, this was a major area of work. During the time of Alcott, the first president, and Annie Besant, the second president. And why is this very important? There is one principle that I'd like to share with you. A mind that is closed, that is made to close, I think I should put it this way. A mind that is made to close while young would be very hard to open when they are adults. In other words, if you teach me to become a fundamentalist, suppose I'm a Christian and you tell me that there's no other source of truth except a certain scripture, and I have been convinced about that, it's very hard to change my mind after I've grown up. On the other hand, the reverse of this, a mind that is being made to open while young is almost impossible to close. We have found this to be true for many years when we have offered Theosophy, Comparative Religion and Philosophy in our college department in Golden Link College. Many of our students come from very traditional, conservative, and even fundamentalistic Christian families, that there is only one way to truth, and that truth comes through their religion. And when they come to the Theosophical Society, and they find that they have to inquire and ask questions, and within about 1 year's time, somehow, first they get confused, really confused, and then afterwards they realize that the questions which they themselves answer made them realize that this former view of theirs about the world, about life, had been too narrow, and once they opened up, nobody else could close it again. In other words, once they see that freedom of inquiry is essential in finding out about the truth, then they can't go back anymore into fundamentalism, into intolerance, into rejection of other possible views of people. And hence, I think we must get involved we must engage young people in this kind of a Socratic inquiry about how to find out about truth, alternative ways of living. And for this reason, a school system is one of the best ways of making this possible. Madame Blavatsky had mentioned in Key to Theosophy, on the part on applied theosophy, she said that if we had the money, we would found schools. It is a very long quotation. And she says, children should be taught to become altruistic, their faculties must be opened up, and most important is that they must develop character and they must be free. Free in all senses, free intellectually, free morally, and that this will make a human being become really a balanced human being, a well-rounded human being, and a mature human being. And she says, towards the end of this long quotation, that this can be achieved through a proper theosophical education. In the early years of the Theosophical Society, Colonel Alcott devoted so many years of his life putting up schools in Sri Lanka, in Ceylon at the time, such that by 1935 there were, I think, 250 plus schools under the Theosophical Society in Ceylon. Today, how many are left with the TS? Zero. None anymore. And there is still a Theosophical Society in Sri Lanka, which was the original one running these schools, but now they are engaged in travel agency. It's not connected with ADYAR anymore. It's an independent Theosophical Society. It's now engaged in travel agency, sending people to foreign countries, doing pilgrimage and so on. But still, it's called Theosophical Society. In the case of Annie Besant, she established or inspired the establishment of so many schools. I was told by Brother Bhattacharya when I was in India a few weeks ago that there were more than 200 such schools in India alone. But by the 1950s, 1960s, only one was left. And this was the Olcott School. And the others were now under the supervision of the government and so on. And a few weeks ago, we had a conference in India where we gathered all these other charity schools of the TOS together in order to see what can be done in order to make them truly theosophical schools, make them grow, and how to make them be able to be sustained. It is a very hard work, and it's a long-term work, but the group there were very enthusiastic, committed, and much work needs to be done, but it's something that is very promising. Now, in the past century, many schools have been established all over the world. In Sri Lanka, as I mentioned to you, there were more than 250 schools. In India, more than 200 schools. In Indonesia, there were 16 schools established, theosophical schools. Then the others have 1, 2, or 3. England, Scotland, Australia, New Zealand, China, Philippines, Indonesia, and Burma. But most of these, one by one, just faded off and disappeared. And the only ones left today, the only ones left at this time, is in India and the Philippines. There is an estimate of about 14 schools in India, charity schools mostly, under the TOS or being supported by the TOS, and there are 5 schools in the Philippines. And this, I believe, can be or should be a major direction in our work. Why is this very important? If we look at the history of the world and the major religious movements in the world, we can exclude governments, because governments really are empowered to put up schools. But non-government schools, you'll find that the school system has been the avenue of spreading influence. It has been done for centuries by the Catholic Church or all Christian churches. It has been used by Islam. It has been used by Buddhism and so on. And it's so powerful because when you mold young minds while they're young, then when they grow up, then it's now very difficult to change their outlooks. Let me just give examples of this to show how or what others have done. Now, in the Catholic Church, which is just the biggest denomination of Christianity, there are 2 billion Christians, and there are about 1 something billion Catholics. And in the Catholic Church, there are many denominations, not denominations, but orders, priesthoods, nunneries. One of them is the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits. And among the Jesuits, there are probably about more than 20,000 Jesuits in the world. These are priests or brothers. And only 2,400 of them are involved in schools. But these 2,400 Jesuits are able to establish 2,129 schools all over the world. Almost 1 Jesuit per school. And they have 1.7 million students. That's almost like a country, a small country. LaSalle Brothers. Oh. There are many LaSalle Brothers, but only 1,693 are engaged in education, and they have 1,049 schools all over the world, and they have about 1 million students. Two of the biggest and best schools we have in the Philippines are a Jesuit school and a LaSalle school. How many schools does the Catholic Church have? They have, throughout the world, more than 200,000 schools with a population, student population of 52 million. 52 million is larger than the combined population of Australia, New Zealand, Sweden, Finland, and Norway put together. That's equivalent to more than 5 countries. That's how powerful such a movement can be. And in the Philippines, you will see as an example how this power is manifested in the national life and national policies. The Philippines is about 85% Catholic, more than 90% Christian. And the top 4 universities in the Philippines, among the top 4, only one is a state university. The other 3 are Catholic universities. Among the top 10, you'll find that probably most of them are also Catholic universities. And many of our leaders come from these schools. So what is the effect on national policies? Let's take divorce, because the Catholic Church objects to divorce. Now, the Philippines is now the only country in the world with no divorce. Italy has divorce, France has divorce, but not the Philippines. The last 2 countries which did not have divorce, which were very Catholic countries, but which changed now and introduced divorce, is Chile and Malta. And the last one is the Philippines, except of course for Vatican. The Vatican, I don't know whether there are many women in Vatican, so no problem about divorce. But in the Philippines, we don't have. The divorce bill has been filed for many, many years. It never gets passed. Why? Because of the Catholic the Catholic voice. Contraception, birth control. It's very hard for any government to implement family planning programs because, again, of the Catholic Church. So you will see that in these 2 examples, the power of these influences among the leaders, among the schools, on national policy. Then, retreat centers. I had the opportunity to conduct a seminar in Naarden, in Netherlands, and I was surprised at what such a center can do. Not only is it a place for retreats, seminars, conventions of the Theosophical Society, but it is a popular place for many other groups, yoga groups, Buddhist groups. In fact, when I was there was a Buddhist group which wanted to rent the entire place for 1 month. And they said, no, because we have other sessions here. But it's how popular a good place, a good retreat center is. And we're very happy to know that in many major sessions in the world, like Australia, United States, you have many such centers. And we in the Philippines decided that we're going to establish such center. It's not easy to establish one because you need to have a big parcel of land. And so, but we decided we're going to do it in the next few years. Then vegetarian restaurants. We advocate animal welfare and vegetarianism, but we must also be active in there by setting the example, by spreading it in a very practical way, like not only associations of vegetarians, but also maybe vegetarian restaurants. Now, there are many other possibilities, but what I'd like to focus on now would be a few examples about what theosophical groups have done around the world, and I can only pick up a few of them. And I learned a lot of them in my travels, especially to India. As you know, the TOS in India is perhaps the most active, the most widespread TOS movement in the world, and there's so much that we can learn from them. Here is an example. In Odisha, the TOS in Odisha has launched for many, many years a continuing movement for women empowerment, women's equality, women's right. And here is a billboard, a big billboard in a city about women's rights put up by the TOS. Then they have continuing seminars and workshops that teach women about their place in the world. And then recently they published a book edited by Dr. Deepa Padhi called Yes, She Can. And this is not just a one-time thing, it is a continuing thing. The other thing I learned in Odisha is that they have launched many years ago an award called Selfless Service Award. I think it's the only award being given of this sort in the Theosophical Society anywhere in the world. What they do is that they will try to identify who are those people, whether Theosophists or non-Theosophists, who are exemplary people who do selfless work. And they organize a big event, invite VIPs like the governor or whatever, and then they give this award. It's called the Besant Selfless Service Award. And recently, when I was there, when they had a regional conference of the TOS in Odisha, they again gave this award to somebody who established her own school. Here's another one, a literacy center in Pakistan, and this has been going on for a long time. And a literacy center can be for young people or for adults, but take note, the literacy center is not simply about learning language, ABC, how to write or read, but when it is imbued with the whole worldview and philosophy of the Theosophical Society, it is capable of altering the way of life and worldview of those who are benefited by such a program. Then in India, in ADYAR, there is an HPB hostel, a dormitory for young people. And in the Catholic Church, there are orders, nuns particularly, whose specialization is putting up dormitories. Near a university, they would put up a dormitory. And then those who enter there are nurtured in their character according to the principles of that particular order. And this again is very powerful because they may be there for 4 years or 10 years, and their character and personalities are developed along the way. A social welfare in ADYAR, India, where particularly women are being trained for various skills, and this again can be a mode of life transformation program. Not just learning how to sew, but by the repeated exposure with Theosophists, then their own way of life can be nurtured and modified. A vocational training center in Delhi, India. So there are many such examples that can be found. And the main thing which to my mind is important and which is emphasized in the quoted MAHATMA letter regarding such work is that when we do such applied aspect to help the world, there must be certain criteria in applied theosophy. First, these activities should have some elements that will make it theosophical. If we just feed people and nothing else, then we are no different from any other NGO or organization trying to feed children or hungry people. The theosophical approach to charity is different. It is not simply the physical body, but the whole human being. And therefore, it can be suggested that if ever such a program is implemented, there should be certain elements that should be present. Such a program should, for example, do any of these things, and to my mind, they would then be considered theosophical. If it promotes universal brotherhood or sisterhood, in other words, unity, tolerance, acceptance of other people, then even if you're just feeding children, but the parents are taught about this kind of relationship with other people, then we are doing theosophical work. Another one would be the promotion of character building. We give scholarship. That can just be money, and we don't even meet them. If we give scholarship, we must meet the students and meet them frequently in order to build their character. Then, nurturing the spiritual life. Promoting selfless service. Promoting the study of religion, science, and philosophy in ways that can deepen our understanding of life and the universe. Such a project should contribute to the long-term well-being and peace of individuals in society. Some other criteria can be added. In the Theosophical Society in the Philippines, about 20 years ago, there were a lot of disagreements and controversies about, is that theosophical work? Is that theosophical work? And people can't agree whether we should do it or not. And hence, we drew up a statement about what constitutes theosophical work. It is something similar to this, where we drew up about 7 statements, wherein which, if any project does any of these 7 things, then to us, we consider it as theosophical work. But when it's simply just lending money to people, feeding children, then it's charity work, but not necessarily theosophical work. There are so many groups who are doing all these things. We don't have to duplicate what they're doing, but we can add an element that they may not have in their work, and that is the theosophical element. And hence, I would suggest, and it's a very good thing that our international president is here, I would suggest that perhaps we can set up a Center for Applied Theosophy, a think tank, a group of people who will think about these things and then do a number of activities, which may be, for example, to research on and document existing practices on applied theosophy, which are found in many places in the world, but we hardly hear about them. It's very helpful to learn about what they're doing, because it may be possible to do it in our own countries. To research on what other organizations or movements have found to be effective in applied aspects, their own applied philosophy, whether it's Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam. What have they been doing in order to apply all these principles into the problem, in solving the problems of society? Then, to propose and promote applied practices among various theosophical sections and TOS groups around the world. Then help the TS headquarters and TOS International to monitor and coordinate efforts at applied theosophy. In itself, it may not be involved in such a project, but it tries to provide information, technology, manuals, and so on, to make it possible for groups to do so. In many fields, in many countries, such centers are very helpful in doing specific things like anti-poverty program. There have been many best practices found around the world, and they document it, and then other countries, when they learn about this, then they are able to do it based on the models that they can copy from. Now, in doing so, such a center would help us doing synergistic work, because it's very difficult to start a project of applied theosophical practices and institutions. It's not easy, and that's the reason why we need support, we need ideas, we need methodologies that have worked. It's very helpful that instead of starting or reinventing the wheel, we learn from the experiences of others and then help each other on the international level. Those who have experience can help those who are just starting. And here, as an international body, we'd be able to synergize and help expand, deepen our work in many, many ways. Such a center can be run by a group of volunteers and also nominees. People can be nominated who are experienced in these areas. And I would suggest that there should be perhaps an office with a recording secretary maybe in ADYAR, but the consultants of such a council can come from anywhere in the world, but the documentation should probably be in one place. And if such a center is well managed, it may become a crucial factor in the future growth and influence of the TS and Theosophy throughout the world within 50 or 100 years. We should look not in terms of just 3 years or 5 years, but in terms of decades or even a century, because these are very difficult things to do. Last time when I was discussing about education programs in the conference on Theosophical education in India, and I was showing how many schools the Catholic Church has. And I suggested, can we have 100 schools by the end of the 21st century, 100 schools? And then one very high official of the TS said, why only 100? Why not 80,000 schools? Wow. You know what we should, if we want to have 80,000 schools by the end of the century, we need to, 80 years, we need to put up 1,000 schools every year, so that by the end of the century we will have 80,000. It's not possible. We should be more pragmatic. Now, how about 100 schools? It may be difficult for the first 10 years, but after that it will become easier. And this has been done by the Catholic Church, and that's why they have 200,000 schools today. Very powerful influences in the world. And volunteers for such work will need to be ready for long-term commitment, not just for 1 year or 2 years, whenever they're thinking of doing things for applied theosophy. And the work should have self-sustaining capacity beyond the lifetime of the pioneers or founders. One of the big areas I think we have is in succession program, such that when there is a very active group of people for 10, 20, 30 years, and after they're gone, then the whole thing would tend to taper down and disappear, because we don't have a well-studied succession program in the leadership of our various sections. So now, in all these things, there's a need for creativity, to be able to identify what can be done and not being afraid to make mistakes. We should not be afraid to fail. What is important is that we should have the right idea. If the idea is right, it is well-grounded, then failures are only temporary, because eventually it should triumph. Then we must make use of modeling. What works in one section, let us document and make it known to other sections and see whether we can do the same thing. For example, I admire very much what the American section is doing in webinars. And so yesterday during our annual meeting of the IPC, of the Indo-Pacific, I was suggesting, why can't we do the same thing, but without making it very expensive? Because technology is already available, and we are not yet adopting it here in the Indo-Pacific region. Why don't we do it here? Then synergy. We must make use of the 50 or so countries where Theosophy is, where there are active people engaged in various things, and let us support each other and help each other. And 1 plus 1 does not equal to 2, but it can become 3 or 4 out of such synergistic efforts. Then the sense of commitment, when we are looking at things in the long run, will be deepened. A lot of members of the Theosophical Society are engaged in charity work elsewhere, in Rotary clubs, in their churches, and so on. Why is it not possible to do it through the Theosophical Society? It's because oftentimes there are no avenues in the Theosophical Society for their effort, resources, and talents to be poured into. We must open up such avenues within ourselves. And then all these must be done, not for any kind of benefit for ourselves, but in the spirit of service. Because if not, then we become, who said it? Spiritual entrepreneurs. And such a spirit will I think, be the heart of theosophical applied work, theosophical service work. And again, I would like to mention that this is something which may be difficult to do, but which must be done. If we don't do it, then the Theosophical Society will remain to be an intellectual organization. And we will not be able to reach out to the world. There are 7 billion people in the world. We are only about 26,000. How can we reach them? Only through applied theosophy. Unless we say, that's no longer our interest. Let's limit our work to membership, if that's the decision. But that's not my understanding of the intentions of the Mahatmas when they put up the Theosophical Society. We have been organized in order to serve the world, not members, but to the world. And hence, even though it is very difficult, but even after 10, 100 repeated mistakes, it's something worth doing. And it's something which, as I said, if it's the right idea, is grounded on right principles, it will work eventually. There will be difficulties in the first few decades, but it will work. And this can be done together. When we do it together, it will become stronger. It will accelerate the pace. And maybe the next generation after us will see that the Theosophical Society and Theosophy is now truly relevant in addressing the problems of the world. Good morning to all of you.